So far, we've just talked about how the Flash interface is set up and how Flash files work. What I want to do now is to kind of explain the animation workflow in Flash. This is the process we're going to be going through throughout the rest of this title. Learning Flash can be very overwhelming, but let's just divide it into a few parts here. Whenever you create Flash content or a Flash animation, first thing you're going to do is create a new document. Now you already know how to do that. The next thing you do is create your Flash content. What I'm going to do here is create a very simple animation, and I don't expect you to know what I'm doing or to follow along or anything, but just to watch. So I'm going to draw a rectangle on the stage. I'm going to go to a later frame in the timeline, frame 10, select it, then choose Insert, Timeline, Blank Keyframe. A blank keyframe is a spot in time where there is no art. And what I want to do is I created the rectangle on frame 1. I'm going to frame 10. I'm going to create a star. I'm going to use the Poly Star tool. Click the Options button in the Property Inspector. Set the style to star and click OK. Then on the stage, I'm going to draw a star. So now I have two keyframes set up. The first keyframe is a rectangle, and the second keyframe is a star. Now the really cool thing that Flash can do is create the frames in between the two keyframes. Let me show you what the animation looks like right now. If I click and drag the playhead, that's that red rectangle at the top of the timeline. If I click and drag it back and forth, you can see that we have a rectangle up till frame 10, and then it's a star. What we can do is tell Flash to morph this rectangle into a star. The name of the process of creating a morph, or where Flash creates animation for you, is called a tween. We'll talk about tweens in much more detail later on, but for now I'm just going to click in between the two keyframes in the timeline, and then at the bottom of the screen, there's a drop-down that says Tween. I'm going to click that button and choose Shape. And now on the stage you can see kind of an awkward shape, but if I scrub the playhead, you can see the rectangle morphs into a star. So this is how you develop content for Flash. You create a new document, you create an animation or some sort of Flash content, and then once you've done that, you test out the content to see what the animation actually looks like. And that's something that you'll be very familiar with by the end of this title called Test Movie. You can test the movie or preview an animation by choosing Control, Test Movie. Now we can watch this animation preview. You can see the rectangle turning into a star. Notice that it's endlessly looping. That's something we'll fix later on when we work with ActionScript. Going to close the window. So now what I want to do is put my content on the web. If I did that now, the name of my file on the web would be Untitled-1. Anybody that saw this animation on a website would see Untitled-1 in the page title. So what I'm going to do to prevent that is save the file. That's something I always recommend doing very often. You can tell a file is not saved when you see an asterisk after the file name. So let's go to File, Save As. I'm going to name this file animation.fla, then click the Save button to save the file. And now to publish your content, and what I mean by publish is Flash creates an HTML page for you. When you publish content in Flash, Flash creates an HTML file, and the other file called a Swift file, which we talked about earlier, is also known as a Flash movie, or the Flash animation. Flash writes all the HTML for you. You don't need to know any HTML, and that HTML links to the Swift file and plays the animation, so you can preview it in a browser. So what I'm going to do is choose File, Publish. After you choose that, Flash creates the HTML and the Swift file for your animation. Now let's look at that animation. I'm going to go to Finder by command tabbing to Finder. And now if I go to the file where I saved my FLA file, I should see an animation.html file. Notice that it has the same name as the FLA file, and animation.swift, which also has the same name as the FLA file. Flash also adds this AC_runActiveContent.js. And that's just a supporting file for this. Now what I'm going to do is drag animation.html down to Firefox and open that file up. And I'll see my animation inside of my web browser. And there it is. Closing the window now. So at that point, you could just upload the animation.html, animation.swift, and the active content JavaScript file to any web server, and then you have Flash content on the web. So that's the basic animation workflow that we'll be going throughout most of this title. We'll go into more detail later about how everything works and how to create content. But now that you know how the basic workflow works and you have an idea of the Flash interface, let's start creating Flash content.